Score, the podcast. The only show taking you inside the studios of the world's most celebrated composers and musical storytellers. Presented by Spitfire Audio.
I'm Kenny Holmes. He's Robert Kraft.
Yes, I am.
Composer Carol on the mic.
Hey there.
This is Score, the podcast presented by Spitfire Audio. We have a great show today. Emmy-winning composer Mac Quayle. You know his work from Mr. Robot, American Horror Story, American Crime Story, Pose,
which I've been watching and just amazed by the show and the music.
So Mac will be joining us in just a bit, but we want to get to a couple of things. First off, Hildur Guðnadóttir's score for Joker is out. I am not listening to it until I see the movie. I don't want to spoil anything. Have you guys listened to it?
I haven't, and I think that's a really cool idea. I'm going to wait till I see the movie too.
Because I feel like
might be tempted.
I want to see it married
wait.
with the picture. I kind of do this a lot, actually. I avoid listening to score releases because I feel like they were made to be married to the picture.
Nice.
And I can fall in love with the score after I see it, but I don't like to spoil it because I want to go in fresh.
Also, there used to be a big kind of voodoo around seeing the titles of cues would give away plot points. You know, Joker gets killed would be a terrible...
I don't think they name them like that anymore, though.
But they want to be really careful about how they title them if they're going to put it out in front of the movie. But I'm with you. I'm going to see the movie and then listen to Hildur's, I'm sure, amazing score. You know, there's some cool documentaries in the marketplace right now, too, which I'm excited to see. Many of them been out in the last few weeks, but there's a new one about Linda Ronstadt, which has gotten incredible reviews. My great friend John Boylan, who worked with Linda, he worked on that one. Also, there's one called Where's My Roy Cohn, which has Liz Gallagher as the music supervisor. She's excellent, and of course that one's going to be a barn burner.
Scored by Lauren Balfe.
Yep, scored by our great friend Lauren Balfe. There's also a cool one coming up called Miles Davis, Birth of the Cool. I mean, just a title like that, I got to see it.
I was going to say, these are like the documentaries curated for Robert coming out in the next couple of weeks.
Including also another one which I read about, which is the story of Frank Zappa. I think I'm going to be spending a lot of time looking at documentaries this fall.
And this Friday, Joker.
Can't wait.
It won the Venice Audience Award,
Correct.
And it's just been killing it. Hildur's on fire. She won the Emmy. There's so much buzz around this movie. I can't wait to watch it.
I think it's going to be the biggest movie of the fall.
We want to take a second to remind our listeners about our presenting partner, Spitfire Audio. If you're a composer listening, you probably already know about Spitfire, but they create sample libraries with all different types of instruments, and they're recorded at Air Studios to help elevate your music. And we have a special promo code for our listeners. If you use the promo code SCORE at SpitfireAudio.com, you save a third off the price of whatever you're purchasing.
Such a deal.
Yeah, and they have a Hans Zimmer strings package. They have the Bernard Herrmann estate package, where they partnered with some different big-name composers. And the new package that comes out later this month, the BBC Symphony package, which is that's their biggest thing, and it's a big deal, and you can pre-order that now.
I think that, having the BBC orchestra under your fingertips as a composer kind of can't go wrong. And
I can't wait for that.
Composer Carol says, quote, I can't wait for that, end quote. I think that's a T-shirt. Get your Spitfire packages.
Yeah, and stick around after today's episode. We're going to play you a cue that they provide to us that shows all the different types of instruments you can get in different Spitfire packages. And again, coming up just after the break, we have Mac Quayle here. I'm super excited. I know you love Pose. I'm all about Mr. Robot.
I love Mr. Robot.
Yeah.
One of my favorite shows.
And the new American Horror Story's out, and we're going to break down his new theme, the new main title theme for American Horror Story. That's all 80s, which I'm excited to chat with Mac about.
Also, don't forget about The Politician starring Ben Platt, who I saw on Broadway. That's the new Ryan Murphy show.
On Netflix, yep.
And Mac scores that as well.
Just came out. Yeah, so a lot to get to with Mac Quayle. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll get to it.
Hey, Matt Schrader here, director of Score, a film music documentary. For the latest news from the film music world, follow us on Facebook. Just search Score, a film music documentary. Or let us know who you want to hear next on the show on Twitter, @ScoreThePodcast.
Welcome back. We're here with Emmy-winning composer. He's been super busy. A lot of things coming up. Mac Quayle joining the show today. Mac, thank you for having us here.
Very exciting because
he looks stunned at the amount of audience we have.
I didn't think we could get that many people in the studio.
It's a big room.
Big crowd.
Hey, did we ever ask, do you have a fabulous name for your studio?
You know,
I think you're about to make one up.
Are we going to get the exclusive naming rights right here?
Stay tuned. Mac Quayle.
Burp Studio?
Burp Studio.
We were just having a weird conversation about a soda that should be called Burp.
Thank you. Did we name the studio?
Maybe it's going to have to be Burp Studios now.
That would be really
I don't
funny
think so.
if that stuck.
We've been just calling it Briar, which is the name of the street.
Thank you. Briar Studios.
Yeah, it's a little boring.
You probably don't want to put that out there anyway. You might have some guests.
Well, it's in Montana, so
oh, good. Yeah, we are. It's a beautiful day in Bozeman.
A beautiful day in Bozeman, isn't it? Big sky. Mac, it's a pleasure to be here. Needless to say, you're scoring many of my favorite shows, and just having an incredible run of wonderful music out there, and a lot of very different music, which is something we've both been talking about, which is stylistically you have this incredible range. And I think our first question was, did you start I know you started in records, if I'm not mistaken, and doing electronic music, and can you tell us a little about how that started and how it morphed into film scoring?
It was records, and it was a time when they were called records.
I love that.
There were records.
It's before my time, but I like hearing about it.
Yeah. I barely remember it, but I was in New York City, and I took an internship at a recording studio.
Which one?
It was called D&D Recording. It became somewhat famous as a hip-hop studio like years after I wasn't working there anymore. But I had one of the quickest internship turning into beginning of music career maybe ever in the history of internships.
Nice.
And I became a programmer and keyboard player on recording sessions. And this was like in the late 80s. And I found myself making dance music.
And you said it was quick because the day that you started, you were making records, or they put you right to work?
Well, the day I started, I was like emptying the trash cans and making coffee, and I started talking with the owner. Told him I was really into keyboards and synthesizers, and he goes, "Oh, well, you have to meet the guy next door, who was the guy that rented a space from them, and he had a room filled with keyboards, synthesizers, samplers, which at that time was a little bit rare." This was, I think, 87. And so they introduced me to him. We hit it off, and I just immediately shifted from my internship at the recording studio to being an assistant working with him. And he just turned me loose in this room, and it was like a playground of toys. And the next thing I know, I'm like doing sessions.
Were you showing him your abilities, or were you just really interested and he saw like maybe this guy has something?
I guess that's what it is. I'm not sure I would have turned someone loose in my room had I had one. But I had a little knowledge, and he saw that. He turned me loose, and I just started using the gear and learning it. And he's like, "Oh, okay, I guess you're ready. I've got a client coming in, and why don't you help them?"
And what would that be like? Was the client an artist on a label, and you'd be writing songs and making records, or was it advertising stuff?
They were artists. I'm trying to think what the first one. For some reason, there was a lot of reggae artists that came through that studio, and they were making reggae using drum machines and keyboards, and then they would sing and play guitars, and so I would program for them. I would like run the technology while they were making a song.
Fantastic.
And those were my first sessions, and I toiled for a year or so. I worked on a lot of records that you never would have heard of, and I don't even know if they came out. And then I kind of had this moment where I was discovered by a dance producer named Tony Moran, and he had a group. It was a duo called the Latin Rascals.
Oh yeah, Latin Rascals.
And they were making music that was very popular in New York, Miami, and Los Angeles. That was called Latin hip hop. And I did a session with him, and a couple of hours into the session, he's literally jumping up and down, smacking me on the back. You're the new guy. You're the new guy. And then, sure enough, like I just was now working every day, and he passed me around to other producers in the scene, and the next thing you know, this like kid from Virginia is making Latin hip hop in New York.
Is this like reggaeton? How would you describe the music?
No, it's it was kind of a mixture of, you know, the beat was a influenced by hip hop, but it wasn't as funky, and it was all electronic. There was like synthesizers, sequencers,
rapping in English or Spanish,
and not rapping, singing.
Oh, singing.
Yeah, it was very poppy, always a pop hook. And there were songs that were making it into the top 10. There was a handful, the Cover Girls, Noel, Sapphire, these artists that were all really big at that time.
And at that point, do you remember, were you thinking, this is my career, I'm making records in New York City? And was film scoring on the horizon? Were you looking through the glass of the recording studio thinking, boy, I'd love to see an orchestra there? What was the transition out of that moment?
It really wasn't an idea at that point. No. And I did my thing in the music business with sort of ups and downs for the next 87 till 2004. So I had like 17 years of it in New York, and Latin hip hop fell by the wayside. House music became the thing, and I teamed up with various DJs and made a lot of records doing remixing pop stars, taking Madonna and Whitney Houston and other people and turning them into dance floor anthems. And that all rolled along until 2003, and the music industry was starting to sort of implode.
Yeah.
I was going to say this is like Napster and all the illegal downloading and LimeWire.
Yeah. No, that had been eating away at the music business for about 3 years at that point. And I'd been on a pretty great run, and now all of a sudden it was like somebody flipped a switch, and the work was gone. And so I'm thinking, okay, maybe it's time to do something else. And I set my sights on Los Angeles with still just a vague idea about scoring. It wasn't really like I'm going to go out to Los Angeles and become a film composer. And I moved out here in 2004 and started sniffing around, and still did some music business work. But
was film music something you were aware of, like growing up, or was this just a brand new idea to you in 2004?
I was aware of it. I mean, I wasn't super tuned into it, but I certainly paid attention, and I'm thinking,
like, do you recall any sort of like noticing a score and being like, wow, that's unique? Maybe it wasn't orchestral as much, but something that caught your eye, or ear, I should say.
I'm thinking one of the first scores that I really noticed was Jaws, and I thought that motif. It's just
a good
like,
start.
Yeah, but when I noticed it, like I wasn't really thinking about motifs, and it just was like, oh, that sound, that's really great. It just really worked.
I think what's great about this is, as you can imagine, we hear the world divides in some ways into the composer that at 5 years old, they knew they were going to, they heard Star Wars, and that set their sights.
Back to the Future. Right, I'm going to be a film composer.
Their dad brought home the score for for Jaws, and they listened. And your story, which is this kind of reinvention and evolution that shows that you can approach this world from a number of different starting points. And look, I don't know if there's a better or worse, because you see the amount of work you've done and you're doing. Clearly, the talent came through, and what's always curious to me is at 2004, film scoring is very different from I'm just going to go in a studio and make a record. you're working with someone else. In that way, it's maybe the same as being a producer, but you are scoring someone else's project. So was that an easy transition? And where was the first moment that you actually wrote something to picture, and how did that come about?
Well, it was a slow transition. I mean, I think the very first thing that I scored, like a film, an indie film, was in 2005. And I did a terrible job.
Lovely.
It was terrible.
Now, is this your opinion?
No, it's my.
Or did everyone feel that way?
No one said that, but I just, my attitude was bad. I didn't know what I was doing, and
other than that,
and so you gotta make some mistakes first,
sure,
and get those out of the way.
Yeah.
But then, like the first kind of real, what I consider the real scoring that I started doing was like a year later. I got hired by Michael Levine to do additional composing for him on a show called Cold Case.
I know Michael.
And Michael's great, and I got a response from him sending him a demo reel, which is like you never get when you send a demo reel. Usually you never hear anything back. But he called me the next day. He's like, "Oh my God, this is amazing. I think I have to hire you to work on something." And he just heard that I knew how to put together sound. Like I to me, in this modern film composing, a lot of it is producing.
Of course.
You write music, but then you have to make it sound like something. You have to choose instruments. You have to mix it. You have to bring it to life in the arrangement. And he heard that in my reel. He didn't really know if I could do it to picture, but then he brought me in on Cold Case, and I started doing it. And he guided me, and it went well.
Wow.
And I worked on that show with him for four seasons.
That'll teach you how to score. Certainly, how to do TV. And out of Cold Case,
you were connected then with Cliff Martinez, right?
Well, that was shortly after I started on Cold Case. I probably met Cliff around the same time. Michael introduced me to him, and several years before, you were asking about, like, did film scores jump out at me? One of his did. Probably 2001, 2000, the movie Traffic.
Oh,
brilliant
great movie, yeah.
Brilliant score.
Great score, too.
Brilliant.
I'm like, I've never heard anything like this in a film before. Who is this guy? And that's when I learned of Cliff and became a fan.
I wonder if you worked on or were around Cliff. I did Solaris with him, which is, with all due respect, not a great movie, kind of a weird movie, but an amazing piece of music.
I think that's a universal opinion of it.
Oh, good, because the filmmakers I really loved, and the ambition of the movie I loved, but it was tough. But Cliff's music, I think, not only is it one of the best parts of the movie, but it's one of those scores that gets licensed all the time, and you hear it in commercials, and you hear it used in trailers because it's really interesting and signature. And what a great and interesting composer for you to kind of have an alliance with, because that's a very he's not traditional, so he has his own way of scoring things. So that's
I totally agree, and I thought Solaris was amazing. That combination of the orchestra, and then there was that motif that kept reappearing that sounded kind of electronic, but turns out it was
gamelan.
It was gamelan, and then steel drums.
Yep.
I mean, it just really really unique. So I was excited to meet Cliff.
Yeah.
And really excited when he said, "Hey, would you want to come work on something with me?"
Wow.
And what was that?
And there was a few films, some kind of indie, smaller films that he did. I'm kind of drawing a blank now what it was, but
it was a good film. Drawing a blank. It's
Drawing a Blank, starring Paige.
Right.
But what it did was I got to step inside the Cliff Martinez musical universe, and I felt very comfortable there because I was such a fan of what he did, and I, had grown up doing electronic music, and it felt right, and so I was able to get inside his world and write music with him that I thought he would like, and it went well.
But I think what's really huge and transitional is not everyone can make the move from just being a great programmer and synthesist and electronic person to actually embracing the art of film scoring, which is narrative and telling story. And I think, listen, I saw, we're going to jump way ahead here in our conversation, but I watched another episode of Pose last night because I'm really into the show and really into the music, and thought, this is storytelling music, but it's a great evolution. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because we have many shows in between where suddenly your career just explodes with all these incredibly cool shows. But there is a moment where maybe it was at Cliff's that the idea of telling story with music, which is very different from record making, did that sort of seep in? Was there a moment where you felt, oh, wait a minute, this is a different art form than making a record? Do you remember sort of feeling like a film composer for the first time?
I'm not sure what that moment was, but yeah, I mean, it happened gradually, and it happens. It's very much in collaboration. So in that case, collaborating with Cliff,
yeah,
and he taught me a lot about that, about storytelling, and then of course he's collaborating with the director. And now still today, I'm collaborating with producers and directors, helping them to tell their story, and so they'll tell me what they want. I'll try to give them that. I'll give them my ideas, and at the end of the day, we end up with something that does that tells the story.
You're collaborating with two of the most interesting TV makers, producer-directors currently out there, Sam Esmail,
yes,
and Ryan Murphy, both cosmically talented storytellers and shooters. Sam really broke through with Mr. Robot, and what an interesting gig for you to get. Was it a competition to get the gig? Did Sam call you up and say, I love your stuff, would you please score my show?
It happened. I had just done my first season of American Horror Story, which was season 4, Freak Show, and one of the editors was going to be a writer on Mr. Robot.
Wow!
And had known Sam for years.
Yep.
Adam Penn is his name, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to be working on this show, and it's really a cool show. Sam wants to meet you." And so I went in for a meeting. I saw the pilot episode, and they had temped it with a lot of different things, but there was a bunch of Cliff Martinez music in there.
Nice.
And there was actually some pieces that I had worked on with Cliff. So I was like sort of in there already.
That's amazing. Could you tell Sam, oh, by the way, this temp music, I played on, I relate to, I'm kind of the guy?
Yeah, totally. I was like, oh, that's a piece that I worked on with Cliff. So I think that helped.
Yeah.
And then I did a demo. I mean, at the end of the meeting, he said, I think you're the guy, but go ahead and do this demo. Let's see what you do.
What a perfect show for your background in electronic music. I mean, this show is internet, it's so digital, and it really speaks to what you came from. Did you feel right at home with this show, you think, like from the get-go?
I did, and it was exciting because what Sam wanted was an electronic score. It was going to be okay for it to sound electronic and be electronic. And I mentioned that because in other things I'd worked on, like Cold Case, for instance, was we did it all with electronics, but we'd get notes back. Oh, it sounds too electronic. Like it can't be too electronic.
So yeah.
And but with Mr. Robot, it's like it's an electronic score, and that was really exciting.
Not only that, but the piece of music we just listened to is so interesting, textured, layered, dissonant, adventurous, and to have a producer say, yeah, that works. That's not an easy piece of music. And to have them support that. What's interesting is there's that electronic thing, but I know you've also done, there's Versace.
Yeah, the cool thing about Versace, and I heard you in another interview describe it as, or it was presented to you as Giorgio Moroder and Silence of the Lambs.
That was kind of the pitch that we were going for. But full disclaimer, I mean, the one sort of orchestral piece from Versace, I wish I had written it. It's a piece of classical music,
right,
which is credited to an Italian composer, Albinoni.
Yep.
Yeah.
It turns out they think his protege wrote it.
Interesting.
But it's a beautiful piece, and I just did a new arrangement and recorded it with strings. And
sure. And how about in Feud? That's a lot of sort of dramatic Hollywood music in a way.
That was an orchestral score, a period orchestral score, which was way outside of my wheelhouse.
But I think one of the great skills of any composer is figuring out how to make what the producers need come to life, whether it's your wheelhouse or you have to collaborate. This is so cool.
This was the main title. It was the first piece that I wrote for the show, and I'm usually writing to picture. This one I wrote without picture, just knowing that the main title would have to be 70 seconds long. And
it's classic Hollywood.
I was going to say classic is the word that comes out to me.
It was fun. It was an exciting new thing, but also incredibly difficult for me.
Which part of it was difficult?
I mean, it was just because it was so far outside the wheelhouse. It just was, sometimes I can just crank cues out on certain types of music. This was not. This was like, toiling.
Were you?
Each note was toiled over.
Are you classically trained?
It's I have minimal classical training, not a lot. So it's I played in high school orchestra.
That helps.
As a percussionist. So that's my deepest experience with orchestra. But yeah, my classical training is minimal.
That one really has not only a classic Hollywood feel, it has a European feel, sort of a 50s European movie, which I really love.
I was sitting in a cafe in Paris when I wrote that on my iPhone.
Come on. That's amazing.
Are you feeding him info?
That's just, I tell you, that makes me think of
just teeing it
sort
up.
of Last Tango in Paris meets some kind of a man and a woman. There's a real European feel to it.
Oh, that's
See,
good. That's
you nailed
good to
it.
hear. It's good to hear. But it's funny you mentioned the classical composers being intimidated by doing something electronic. And I've encountered that. I've had conversations with people where they're like, yeah, I don't know what to do. It's just so foreign, so weird. And the first time that I heard that someone said that, it seemed very strange to me, because I just think of sort of electronic music. I love it. I embrace it. I'm proud of it. But I kind of see it as this. It's like not as trained. It's not as sophisticated as classical, and so that the classical musicians and composers are looking at the electronic guys and going, "Oh, this guy's not real music. It's very, it's
That's
silly.
exactly how
I
they
could
say
do
it.
this with my phone, and but instead they're like, oh, I don't know how do you do that? How do you get a synthesizer sound? So
I think we should take a minute to regroup, and then we come back. Let's talk about some of these new shows that are coming up.
Yeah.
And got a couple great.
Got some new cues to
New premieres.
break down here. Much more with Mac Quayle. We'll take a break and we will come back.
Hey, I'm Robert Kraft. I'm here with Kenny Holmes. Are you getting all that additional cool material that we have online for Score the Podcast? Kenny, where do they find it?
Twitter, @Score the Podcast. Instagram, @Score Movie. Facebook, Score, a film music documentary. If you're not following, you're missing out. We have behind-the-scenes videos, and we do giveaways, and sometimes we retweet Jordan Bieber.
Oh, Jordan Bieber's there. BTS, behind the scenes. Go check us out.
Hi, this is Marco Beltrami. You're listening to Score, the podcast. And now, let's get back to the show.
Welcome back to Score the Podcast. We're here with Mac Quayle inside the studio to be determined unnamed. Have we come up with anything yet?
I think it's
Briar Studios
in Montana.
And this is the new horror story main title.
The new.
Brand new.
Brand new from 1984.
It's so cool. And it's kind of 84. Sounds, vibe, really authentic. Love it. And I understand why someone recognized how you produce, because all of your cues and themes, really interesting production as well as writing, and super kind of recording production. So,
Ooh.
Oh, the tape machine
that's
lost power.
Fantastic.
We're on a backup generator. We can keep going.
Do you write a new theme for every season of AHS?
No.
Just
No,
after 3 years, they said, let's go again for 4?
Well, no, this is season 9.
As I was saying, after 8 years, they said, let's go again for 9?
They had a theme starting in season 1,
Yeah.
and that has been there for 8 seasons. And there's been some refresh that's happened where some new melodies and sounds have been layered on top of the original that pertain to the particular season. But this year they wanted to do something. Yeah, it's AHS 1984. They wanted to do something 80s, and so I took like this 3 notes of a bass line from the original, and then I just did something. It's like almost like an 80s dance track.
Is this something that's going to live with the show now moving forward if it continues, or is this a special season time period thing?
I think it'll have this one season, and then who knows what. I think there's season 10 is on the books. I don't know what that is and what the theme will be.
Did you drag out some 80s synths? I mean, I'm looking at your synth lineup here, and I see a couple that are genuine articles of that era. I don't know if you use them or you just design sounds that were kind of 80s.
Yeah, I did.
And a theremin.
I was on a really tight deadline to do this, and the plugins are so much faster.
Of course.
So I used some 80s plugins.
Yeah.
That are meant to be 80s synths. But
that bass sound that comes in is so kind of Quincy, Bruce Swedien, 1980s dance track. It says it instantly. So was that the first show you did with Ryan Murphy?
Was Horror Story.
Yeah.
Season 4.
And did you know at that point that he was going to become Ryan Murphy? I guess he'd done Glee.
He was Ryan Murphy. He maybe wasn't in all bold lettering,
Yeah.
as he is now. But because he'd had Glee, he'd had 3 seasons of Horror Story, he'd had Nip Tuck.
Oh, Nip Tuck, that's right.
The Normal Heart, the HBO film.
Right. I didn't realize you didn't start Horror Story. You came in season 4?
Right.
Right.
And it was one of those calls that you usually never get. A life-changing phone call that one of his producers called me and said, "Hey, we're going to go in a different direction on American Horror Story this season. By any chance, could you write a piece of music this afternoon?"
Love that.
And was this coming off of your Mr. Robot success, or
Mr. Robot was yet to.
It wasn't
next
out
to
yet.
come.
So what did they hear, or what did they see that drew them to
the
you?
Latin Rascals.
Yeah, the Latin Rascals. Yeah, it was. I had worked on the Normal Heart,
Nice.
Ryan directed film. I had worked on it with Cliff,
Oh, wow.
and so like 6 months later, out of the blue, I get this call from the producer.
Did you have any plans that afternoon that you had to cancel?
I didn't.
That's the right answer.
The universe had a hole in my schedule.
God, you're lucky you picked up that phone call.
So I wrote a piece. They sent me some video. I wrote a piece. I sent it in. They liked it. They had a couple of notes, and I addressed the notes and sent it back. They said, "We love it. We're gonna play it for Ryan in the morning." So the next morning, I get another call, and they basically just say, "Can I speak to the new composer of American Horror Story?"
Oh, yeah.
Less than 24 hours later.
Love that.
Crazy.
Cancel your rumba lessons for the rest of the week. You're getting busy.
And then that was it. That was like 5 years ago.
Would you call that like the defining moment, like taking the next step?
That was it. Yeah, for sure. That was when the rocket blasted off.
Right. That must be it, because Mr. Robot comes next, but then you start doing a lot of Ryan shows.
Well, a year after that, we're now in 2015, fall of 2015. I now have 4 shows, and it was overwhelming. I mean, there was literally a week where I spent some time on the floor in my closet, like weeping, because I was freaked out.
I do that.
It was like
pretty
too
much most days. I start that way, so I'm used to that.
And I'm like, okay, I can't do this. I'm gonna have to call him back and tell him I can't take that last show.
Did somebody
people
refrain you?
They talked me off.
Yeah.
Yeah, they said you're gonna be okay. You gotta get, you gotta put your team together. It's gonna be all right. And
did you already have a team at that point?
I mean, I had some help. I had an assistant, and I had like maybe one additional composer.
Because we've had discussions, I think it was Bear McCreary that was saying like it took him a long time to finally decide to like trust other people in his projects and bring a team on to take that next step, because you reach a point where you just don't have enough time in the day to do everything. Was that around that time when you...
I mean, it was dawning on me that it was going to be really important to have the help that I needed. And so I slowly began working with more people, and I made it through that couple of weeks where it was crazy. I mean, I think I was signed on to 4 shows. It was like a 2-week period when all 4 were going.
Were they all
and
Ryan's?
And then 1 dropped off.
Were they all Ryan shows?
One was Robot.
Right,
and then
sure.
3, I guess it was Horror Story, Scream Queens,
Right on.
and The People versus O.J. Simpson.
Oh, man.
So somehow I made it through.
It's intense. They're all high profile. I don't blame you for getting in that closet and weeping. That's a lot of pressure. I think the great part is that you figured it out. But I also know, this is the quality problem that everyone hopes for. What if I had everything working out and going full bore and my creativity was at a peak? It happens and you think, I can't do this, but you got through it, and look what happened. I mean, nailed it. So,
I wonder with American Crime Story, these series, because they're kind of biopics as opposed to fiction, does that change your approach? Do you do like more research into the era, or is there anything different about the process because it's a true story being recreated?
I mean, not really. Not really. I mean, there's all these conversations with Ryan and his team initially as we try to come up with ideas for what the sound will be, and some of that is informed by the period. But no, it's just the same role, just telling a story. And the fact that it's true didn't really have an effect. And what in those 2, you mentioned those 2 shows, the Versace and the OJ, it was, especially with the OJ, the performances were so strong in that the score didn't have to do too much, and we were just the initial pieces were really pushing it, and we realized it's too much. We don't need that. So the score ended up being very subtle and less music, and just kind of got out of the way of these fantastic performances.
Kind of cool that you're living in LA doing this OJ show. Did you take any trips down the 405?
In a white blazer?
Bronco.
A Bronco, as I was saying, a white Bronco.
I did. I wrote all the music, actually, in a Bronco.
Oh, that's so funny.
I was in New York when it was all happening, and
You mean when OJ was happening?
yeah, when that was.
I was
going to
ask you where you were.
That's a beautiful cue. It has either, it's hard to tell because it sounds so good, real strings or synth strings, but it sounds orchestral and electronic.
No real strings were harmed in the making of.
Good, because it sounds very authentic, but that is what gives it its epic quality. It's pretty amazing that's one of your shows because it was so good. And you also said something that is a composer's dream. When the performances are great or the story is great, boy, the heavy lifting is not on you. And the opposite is true. When it's kind of a stinker, they turn to the composer and say, can you make this funnier or scarier? Or can you make this character not seem so leaden in their performance? So you're lucky to have that great material in front of you. It brings me to one of my favorite new shows and a question about Ryan Murphy, which is Ryan has been involved in some incredible musical series, not the least of which Glee and Pose. I don't know. I know Brad Falchuk a little bit, who works on all these shows with his partner. Does Ryan have specific musical ideas for you? Does he give you a lot of freedom? Does he say, here's exactly what I need you to do?
He's a big picture guy when it comes to music. You know, he will maybe offer just one big idea, and then I'll run with that. And I mean, for Pose, it was that it takes place in New York in 1987. First
That's
season
your zone.
needs to be
You were there.
synth score, an 80s synth score. Like that's what he wanted.
Wasn't that the year you started producing music?
Well, it was,
Coincidentally,
that's kind of perfect. You've really captured the sound of that moment. And I mean, it's just, this could be a pop hit from that minute. You really expect Madonna to start singing, and
There's a lot of source music in this show too.
yeah,
yes. In fact, it's mostly, and you know, this piece that you're playing, I get to do a few in this vein, but most of the funky dance stuff was actual source, you know, of the era, and the score that I was writing was more the heart of the show. It was for the emotional interplay between the characters.
Do you get involved in the production of some of the original, you know, there's some original songs kind of thing and original moments that are not necessarily well-known needle drops. And are you involved in any of that?
I'm not. I get credited all the time.
Fabulous.
It's funny.
We're in Hollywood.
And it shows how what we do as composers, you know, we're in the industry, we know film and TV music, and so of course we know what composers do, but the public, most of them don't really like, oh, you write music for that show? I love that song that was playing in the
Yeah, of course. You
know?
wrote Boogie, Oogie, Oogie.
Yeah. Or they think, you picked the best songs for that show.
Sure.
And I'm like, well, thank you, but I didn't have anything to do with them.
Yeah, it's Amanda is the music supervisor.
Yes.
Yeah. Fantastic show. Super unique and interesting show. I mean, a really stunningly contemporary and...
Yeah, as diverse as your scores are for all these Ryan Murphy shows, he's creating such diverse shows too, just different styles. And of course, you have The Politician, which just came out. What was the initial idea? What was the sound that what was his big idea?
Well, that the music needed to be fun, but not light, not comedy.
For someone who hasn't seen the show, how would you describe it, just so we can get a vibe when we play this cue?
Well, so, you know, the story is that there's a high school senior in Santa Barbara who's very ambitious to be a politician. Like that's sort of the basic premise. And the characters in the show, they're very wealthy, and Ryan was quoted recently saying, "Oh, it's like rich people behaving badly."
Sounds like a combination of Election, the Reese Witherspoon movie, and Succession.
There's some of that, yep, and
Succession.
it reminds me a little of Scream Queens. There's no horror or anything, but so we're in Santa Barbara. There's a lot of young, rich white people, basically, and so like, what is their sound? If someone were to ask you, like, what's the sound of
Is it contemporary
young
era?
rich white people in Santa Barbara? It's contemporary.
Yeah.
We were scratching our heads. We didn't really. We tried a variety of things. Nothing was quite working, and then we thought, okay, let's not necessarily score the sound for the people, but the place.
Nice.
And so the idea then became that we would sprinkle a little bit of a Spanish flavor for Santa Barbara,
Of course.
into the music. And it doesn't necessarily work on paper, but then we tried it, and all of a sudden we knew we had it. And I think this piece, Wonderful Boy, is where we knew we had the sound.
Works for me.
Ooh, there you go. I'm picturing downtown Santa Barbara right now.
I'm picturing the Mission in Santa Barbara with the kind of beautiful mariachi trumpet feel.
Chris Tedesco,
Was it
fantastic
Chris?
player. Yeah,
That's so great. Recording at Briar Studios.
Briar Studios didn't exist yet,
Okay.
and he recorded in his own studio.
Fabulous. The modern technology wonder. Is that a main theme or just a cue?
It's a pretty main theme. It gets used in a lot of different ways throughout the show, the series, and it just after all this searching, once we came up with this, we were like, okay, I think this is the sound. And unlike a lot of the projects that I've worked on, the palette of the show, it's almost all in that piece. And I'm pointing to the mixer because it's right there in the mixer. Nylon string guitar, upright bass, trumpet, piano, percussion, some strings. And that's pretty much, maybe there was an accordion.
I love that.
And that's it. That's the palette.
This is the other cue you can use.
Now, this is more overtly Spanish.
Yeah, flamenco. Yeah.
This sounds like there's going to be a showdown.
This was one of the early scenes that were introduced to Jessica Lange's character, and she like barges into this hospital room, and it's just a flurry of like crazy passion, and it was like a flamenco dancer.
Oh, that's great.
This was a fun one to do, and it oddly worked well for what was happening in the scene.
That's so interesting. And also, what we've heard today is you get to write music in so many different arenas. I mean, the Pose music and the American Horror Story music and this, it'd be hard to tell they're the same composer because it's a lot of imagination going on. I think before we wrap it up, we got to know, are you going to make any more records? It's now many decades later, and dance music couldn't be bigger right now. Is there a Mac Quayle? Is there a
will we see you at Coachella soon?
Yeah, man, love that.
Okay, I'm just going to put it out here.
Here we go.
The intention.
I think
And
we're
maybe,
gonna
and maybe so. I've been performing the Mr. Robot score live.
That's right. Yeah.
And there's been a number of performances. A couple here. Did it in Malaga, Spain, at the festival there.
Fantastic.
Nice.
And the last one was at the Roxy in Hollywood.
Oh, that's cool.
And so I think it's the perfect act to perform at Coachella.
Paul Tillett, Golden Voice. Today we announce.
So I
Saturday's
think,
headliner next April.
Yeah, maybe headliner's aiming a little high, but a nice stage when the sun is down, I think would be.
Well, and then you have Rami Malek come out and do a little Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah.
Tag team.
You know what? I like it. So would it be, when you say performing, is it the picture? Would it be just the music?
They do have screens.
I mean, the show. Yeah, they have a lot of screens. The shows that I've done so far haven't really been too picture. I've incorporated some images from the show in a couple of pieces.
Okay,
but I feel like I've only really scratched the surface of the potential of it. It's evolved each show, and the production has gotten better. And the last show had myself and another keyboard player, a drummer, and a guitar player, and then projections.
My instinct is you should get your publicist to promote the idea of Mr. Robot at Coachella.
She's turning red.
Or someone should bring that idea to Golden Voice, because do you know that people would, the right size tent, I mean, Sahara, Mojave, Gobi, one of the dance tents, I think you'd get a crowd.
I mean,
for
if
that.
you ask me, there should be a film and TV music tent.
Done.
At
We're going to do
Coachella.
it. Good idea. We've
'Cause,
had
I mean,
several good ideas here today.
The Hans Zimmer experiment was more than successful.
I think so.
Score the tent.
I don't even remember who the other headliners were, but that Hans Zimmer at Coachella blew up, and I just feel like that would do so well. I mean, people are binging everything, and it's part of the culture of these.
I think it's a great idea. I'm going to take it. I'm going to say that I thought of it. And
we'll be backstage rooting you on. I mean, right?
And I think to tie things up, we can put some little advertising slogans on the back of our cans of burp that say, "Hear Mr. Robot live at Coachella."
I would go.
With Mac Quayle.
Are you doing any other Mr. Robot or any concerts?
Mr. Robert?
Mr. Robert.
Mr. Robert. That's the spin-off.
Robert the 14th.
It's Mr. Robot's brother.
Yeah, Mr. Robert.
There's nothing scheduled, and but
please let us know.
I really want to do more. I love performing, and it is challenging to fit it into the production schedule of scoring all these projects. So
well, we want to send you back into that little funky room where you weep.
I was going to say, your schedule's booked. You got closets in the morning
live
and then
performing,
working all night.
Because you could do not only the Mr. Robot show, but the Pose show would be killing. Have the House of Evangelista or the House of Abundance put on a show. And if you are a fan of the show Pose, you will know exactly what I'm talking about and send in your yes, Mac Quayle, please do that show to Score the Podcast. And what a great conversation we've had. I'm going to say it myself. I got to talk about my favorite new shows on TV.
Let me know when that Coachella announcement comes out, and we'll
made it.
We'll tweet it.
I think we're done.
Should we start a petition right now?
It just started.
All right. Sign it.
Live at Coachella.
Mac, thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Despite all of the madness in your life, you made time for us. We really appreciate it. And we want to remind our listeners to rate and review, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, and also follow us on Twitter at Score the Podcast. And stick around after the ending of the show. We're going to play you a little cue from Spitfire Audio so you can hear how to elevate your music.
I think that I'm thinking of new shows, either Mr. Pose, kind of a combo, American Robot Story. I'm working on some things. I'm going to go to Ryan Murphy and say
American Robert
Story.
Yeah, this could be fun.
Stick with us. We have a lot of ideas. We'll see you next week on Score the Podcast. Hey, Score listeners, we are so lucky to have Spitfire as our presenting partner every week. They are a perfect partner for our show because they provide so many cool sounds for so many cool movies and TV shows. So
so many composers using this stuff.
A lot of composers. Composer Carol. Composer Carol's here. She uses it. And we're going to play you this week's Spitfire cue. They send us one every week.
And this is produced by one of these packages that they have available at SpitfireAudio.com.
That you can own today.
And isn't there a score deal that we give out, Kenny?
I think you know the answer to that.
I think it's a third off, which is
1/3? That can't be.
I've seen some other deals.
How are they making
recently.
any money?
I think they're just so excited to have Score listeners be using Spitfire. They say, we would love to have you aboard the Spitfire train.
Use the promo code SCORE, save a third off, and check out this cue. You can get all sorts of different sounds like the ones you just heard. Go to SpitfireAudio.com. Use the promo code SCORE. Save a third off, and we will see you next week.
Next week. Can't wait.
See ya.